Welcome back to another episode of Tryp Rapport. On today's solo episode, I'm going to talk about my first experience with Psilocybe Cyanescens mushrooms. The majority of magic mushrooms out there are Psilocybe cubensis. These are the standard grown-on-grain indoor species that most mushroom consumers have experienced. Your golden teachers, B+, penis envy, etc. are all strains of Psilocybe cubensis. Psilocybe cyanescens, however, are a wood-loving species that grow in the wild where the climate permits, typically in the Pacific Northwest. I have always been interested in trying cyanescens because a lot of the top mycologists that I've listened to over the years have stated that the wood-lover species are their preferred mushrooms and that they rarely dabble with indoor-grown mushrooms anymore. I had also heard accounts of wood-loving species feeling more chill and more natural, with less of a propensity to induce a bad trip. I was also interested by the concept of the mushrooms actually coming out of the earth naturally, rather than being cultivated indoors on sterile grain. When I first started getting into mushrooms, I went down the rabbit hole of where they grew in the wild. It seemed as if the Bay Area was the furthest south in California that psychedelic mushrooms were common, but I did find one forum where somebody stated the furthest south that anyone had ever found a cyanescens mushroom was in Escondido, California, where I was living at the time. Needless to say, during every rainy season that followed, I had my eyes peeled anytime I passed a patch of mulch. However, I never did find that elusive mushroom. A few years ago, some BMX friends reached out that I had met up in Seattle. They were in town on a road trip, so I threw them the invite to come ride the yard. As most interesting conversations in my life do these days, the topic of mushrooms came up, and they said they had a bag in the van if I wanted any. I asked if by chance they were wood lovers, and they said indeed they were, that a good friend of theirs is always on the hunt for mushrooms around Washington. I was stoked on the offer, and I gave them some penis envy mushrooms that I had at the time to see what their thoughts were on comparison. This was the era of my psychedelic journey where mushrooms had gotten weird for me. Every time I would set foot in that realm, I would immediately get the message that I didn't belong or I wasn't welcome there, which would typically spiral me into a bad experience. Often that I was poisoned or I was dying. Getting some mushrooms from some friends who I didn't really know all that well, from their friend who I didn't know at all, made me a little more nervous to take that journey. If homegrown mushrooms made me question whether or not I was dying, I could really see it getting away from me not knowing if these mushrooms were properly identified. The dehydrated mushrooms they gave me did have the iconic cyanescens wavy cap, and it was clear that the stems had some bluish bruising, but I couldn't verify a gelatinous coating on top of the cap, nor could I spore print them to ensure they were legit. All of these factors are why it took me so long to actually try these mushrooms. Fast forward a few years until a few weeks ago, my fiancée had expressed that she was feeling the calling for a moderate mushroom dose. I didn't have that calling per se myself, but after my 5-MeO journey and the subsequent ayahuasca experience, I said my piece with the mushroom entity and have had positive journeys to the other side since. I figured I would do a light dose just so I could be there for her in case things got too heavy on her end. She did a little over 3 grams of cubensis, an Amazonian strain, and I decided to finally give the cyanescens a go. The handful of mushrooms the Seattle friends gave me were 5.2 grams. I powdered them and divided them into 3 portions, 2 with 2 grams, and a third was the remaining 1.2. I had always heard that the outdoor variety are typically twice as strong as the indoor, so I decided to send the 1.2 as a test dose to see where that got me. If they were indeed twice as strong, 2.4 of cubensis would be a solid dose that would allow me to have my own experience yet be there for Morgan if she needed me. Jumping into my journal entry, on a fasted stomach, the ingestion time was 11:53 a.m. I wrote, admittedly, a little nervous going into this one, mainly because the mushrooms are wild harvested and not grown myself. That being said, I do trust the source. The caps were wavy, the Seattle dudes have done them, and there's no need to worry. Also, the fabled twice the potency of cubensis gave me some nerves, but even at 1.2, I'm looking at potentially 2.4, which should be an ideal dose. On my last VWAT experience, ingesting slightly more than a microdose, I did enjoy my headspace and I did feel welcome in that mushroom realm again. I've had so many joyous experiences previously, and I was taught my lesson prior to trying Psilocybe. I feel that Psilocybe brought some necessary purging, the tremors and such, and I'm going into this with a fairly clean and respectful vessel. I had hoped to do combo prior to any medicine work down here in order to really clean myself out. However, I'm here to support Morgan, and she really felt a calling to dive in today. I hope she gets everything that she's looking for with the higher dose. I have always pondered if clusters of mushrooms are more powerful than onesies or twosies, and she sent a 3.3 cluster, so we shall see. Real quick, what I was referring to here is how mushrooms grow. When you see them pop up in a bulk grow, sometimes they pop up solo, while others pop up together connected at the base. Typically, I'll pick them all, dry, powder them together so that you know you have an equal potency across the board and that every experience going forward is going to be somewhat comparable. However, I've always wondered if the ones that grow in a cluster are meant to be consumed together. The unbelievable experience I had on my first hero dose was a cluster that weighed exactly 5 grams in the dot. So on my last cultivation, every notable cluster that popped up, I dried and bagged separately to test this hypothesis. I had a 3.1 cluster and a 3.3 cluster, and Morgan chose the 3.3. Anyway, back to the journal entry. I wrote, I am grateful for however deep my journey goes today, even if it stays very surface level and I can hold space for her. However, I do hope to at least get some enhanced audio perception to be able to further dial in my newest medicine playlist. I wrote Source, Guardian, God, Creator, Mother Aya, whatever name you choose to be called. Please take us under your wing today. Guide us where we need to go. Keep away any malevolent energies that do not need to make contact, and allow us both to become wiser, more loving human beings with a greater capacity to hold space for others and help them on their own healing journey. The next entry comes at 12:10. Nothing yet. At this point, I decided to try some self-hypnosis in this state. I felt as if I dropped into the hypnotic state faster than usual, and the visions began. I threw on an older recording that I had made for public speaking anxiety. As I was going through it, I had the revelation that there's just no need to have any nerves around public speaking. In the journal entry I wrote, it's easy, it's fun, it really doesn't make any sense to get shortness of breath, jittery legs, or flushed in the face. I just needed to start calm, stay calm, breathe, relax, and connect to the audience. I wrote, Friday will be the test to see if it's stuck, with mushrooms setting the new program into the mind, as I had a wedding coming up to officiate. Now, it seems like common sense just to say it's stupid to be nervous and there's no reason to be. But until you experience that as a revelation, it's hard to rewire that program that tells you otherwise. It's these aha moments in the psychedelic realm that seem to have the biggest impact. I've done plenty of public speaking in my life. I don't have a crippling fear to do so, but I still didn't quite feel like I was as chill as I could or wanted to be. Oddly enough, I performed that wedding on Friday and another one the Sunday after and was cool as a cucumber through both of them. Mentally anyway, both were hotter than hell. But a testament to the psilocybin self-hypnosis showing potential because it was 90 degrees with humidity, with ocean in the background and other beach noises. I had to project my voice extra loud. All of these factors should have made the situation even more difficult, but it felt effortless. Fascinating stuff. By 12:30, after the short self-hypnosis, I was in it. The closed-eye visuals were there, although not very vivid or colorful. I decided to go out on the deck and listen to some music. There's an amazing view from where we're staying of the ocean and islands in the distance with a jungle all around. I've always been a huge fan of clouds while tripping, and they were exceptional that day. I got the feeling that the clouds were alive. We tend to have this perception that plants and animals are the only living things on this planet, I guess because we have a way of interacting with them. I'm not sure why it came through so strongly, but it was as if I was watching a day in the life of the cloud. And just because we don't have the sense to pick up on how they communicate and interact with one another, it doesn't mean that they don't do so. Bizarre. Music sounded better than sober, but it wasn't quite as vivid as my normal dives into that realm. I don't know if it's because the mushroom sat in the freezer for several years, or if that batch just wasn't as potent as your typical Cyanescens, but the 1.2 grams felt just like 1.2 grams of cubensis, just enough to barely get me into the experience. I spent the next hour or so holding space for Morgan while she processed some things. Eventually, I meandered back to the deck with music again, and the next journal entry states, I came to the realization that I am very proud of this avatar that I'm in. Albeit conceited, I think I'm an interesting person to interact with, and it seems that others believe that, and I think they should. I believe that having positive mental health is everyone coming to this conclusion, the feeling of being happy with or at least content with oneself. When people feel dead inside or unlovable, it's difficult and likely even impossible to enjoy this life. I suspect that if one dies while still in this mental state and they have their very first life review at death, it's probably a huge bummer. When I've had my past life reviews and saw every situation I ever handled poorly, I've always been able to come back and do my best to right those wrongs. I suppose if you have a similar life review without the ability to come back and level up, that might be what the concept of hell is. I would also assume that if this life is some kind of game and you pass on without coming to a place of loving yourself, that it could be seen as a failure or losing the game. Does that mean you have to do this level all over again or start back from the beginning? Who knows? I guess we'll all find out one day. Following that revelation, I was pretty much back to baseline, hot and sweaty, so I suggested a dip in the ocean. It was exactly what we needed. The water felt rejuvenating as usual. Being in the water on psychedelics is an experience in itself that I highly recommend, but obviously do so safely. On the appropriate dose, not in a situation like a crazy riptide. Been there, done that. Terrible idea. But after a quick dip, we went across the road to grab some fresh fruit from a ganip tree. It had already been picked pretty clean on the lower branches, so I had to climb pretty high up to get to the fruit. I felt super strong and balanced in my body climbing that tree. It was effortless, and as usual in this state, my sense of fear around heights was very diminished. My final journal entry said, "Overall good experience. I'm more than confident bumping up to the 2-gram dose." Something that didn't quite pop up during the experience, but that I realized in the days that followed, was the reset that I got, which I absolutely needed. I have often said that after a psychedelic journey that I feel reset. At one point, I felt that the whole dying on psychedelics feeling was accurate. I felt that I killed off the older, flawed version of myself to bring in a fresh version better capable of navigating this life. In How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, he explains the reset of the default mode network with his ski slope metaphor. He explains that our brains are hardwired for shortcuts to make life easier. You can observe these shortcuts like the tracks going down a mountain on a heavily used ski slope. Even if you wanted to go a new direction, the tracks are eventually going to catch you and send you down a pre-designated path. After a psychedelic journey, it's as if the mountain got some fresh powder. You get to start from scratch and think whatever way can best benefit you going forward in life. If you choose to cut those same old paths into the snow, that's on you, but the option is there to evolve. Since moving to this bizarre yet beautiful island in the middle of the Caribbean, my brain was still wired for San Diego. It was wired for respectful, decent drivers. It was wired for comfort and easy existence, flawless weather. It was wired for Amazon Prime delivering items with free shipping in 1 to 2 days. The San Diego brain cannot thrive on this island. I remember thinking daily, man, the people here are just so rude. And it felt as if it was only directed toward the white population, so I was extra bummed on the racism. This is an interesting learning experience being a minority for the first time in my life and experiencing the struggles that come with it. But after this mushroom journey, I got the illumination that it wasn't just hate towards me as a white guy, but they were just as rude to their fellow people. That also bummed me out to see that a culture could be so disgruntled, and then the picture became even more clear. The people who were angry and disgruntled are front desk employees, security guards, cashiers, etc. These people all hate their jobs and they're miserable. The locals that I've interacted with walking my dog around the neighborhood or at the beach or out enjoying themselves are typically quite friendly and welcoming. It just goes to show that if you're wasting your life doing something that provides you no joy or no sense of meaning, you're going to end up a miserable, disgruntled human being, and that's no life worth living. The fresh powder on my default mode network gave me the ability to carve a new path necessary to live on an island, and life here has been substantially easier and more beautiful ever since. Until next time, thanks for listening. Love you guys.